We've all watched horror movies. Monsters in the closet, shadows that stretch across the floor, doors that creak open by themselves. But deep down, we know it's all make-believe. The actor's going to scream, the music's going to swell, and the credits are going to roll. But what happens when the horror doesn't end with the screen fade? What happens when someone tells you they really saw something? No script, no camera, no cut to save them, just them. The silence, the shadow, and something watching that wasn't supposed to be there. That's the kind of story we bring here to the Horror Podcast Show. Not fiction, not fantasy, but real horror. Stories told by those who lived to whisper the tale, or sometimes by the ones who barely did. You see, real horror has a different weight. You can feel it in the way the voice cracks, in the long pause before they say, "I've never told this to anyone before," in the shaking breath between sentences, as if saying it out loud might wake something up again. That's not acting, that's memory, that's trauma, unhealed, that's truth, dressed as terror. And it's in those moments when you realize that the scariest things are not found in books or films or haunted house attractions. They are found in ordinary lives, in your neighborhood, on your street, maybe in the room you're sitting in right now. We've had listeners tell us stories of late-night knocks with no one behind the door, of voices calling them by name when they were alone in the house, of family members who passed on but returned for one final message. You don't need CGI to feel that kind of chill. All you need is the truth and someone brave enough to tell it. Real horror isn't about jump scares. It's not about loud music or fake blood. It's about what lingers in your head, in your home, in your soul. It's the kind of story that makes you leave the light on just a little longer. The kind that makes you check twice before going to bed. The kind that stays with you long after the podcast ends. And that's why we do what we do. Because we believe there's something sacred in telling these stories, not just to frighten you, but to witness something others won't believe. To say, "This happened, I'm not crazy, and I'm not alone." That's the power of real horror. Not to scare for the sake of it, but to reveal the thin, fragile veil between this world and whatever waits beyond. Every episode of this podcast is a candle lit in that darkness, not to chase it away, but to see what's really there. So the next time you hear a story on this show, remember, someone lived that, someone feared it, someone survived just enough to share it with you. And now that you've heard it, it's part of you, too. After hearing a real horror story, most people react the same way. Goosebumps, a dry mouth, that instinctive glance behind the shoulder. But then, something strange happens. They press play on the next one. Why? Why do we willingly walk into the dark? Why do we let fear inside our ears, our hearts, our homes? The truth is simple. Deep down, whether we admit it or not, we crave the feeling. Not just fear, but being aware. Horror doesn't numb us. It does the opposite. It awakens something we forget in our everyday lives, the rawness of being alive. In a world that's scrolling past us at lightning speed, where notifications fill the silence and algorithms tell us what to feel, horror cuts through the noise. It interrupts. It commands attention. Because for a few minutes, nothing else matters except what's creeping around the corner. That's the paradox. We chase horror, not to die, but to feel alive. Think about it. That racing heartbeat, the sharp inhale, the icy tingle down your spine. It's not just fear, it's the body remembering survival. It's primal, it's instinct, it's the ancient part of your brain saying, "Pay attention, something's not right." But here's the twist. In the safe space of a podcast, or a story, or a voice in your headphones, you're in control. You let the darkness in, knowing you can press pause, knowing you can turn on a light if it gets too real, and that power is exhilarating. Horror gives you something the real world often doesn't. A release, a way to feel your own edges again, to sit with adrenaline instead of anxiety, to be scared without being powerless. Because unlike the fears that haunt our daily lives, bills, loss, failure, heartbreak, this fear is contained. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And when it's over, you're still here, alive, whole, stronger. That's the gift of horror. It reminds you of everything you've survived. And yet, there's more to this fascination than just adrenaline. There's curiosity, a hunger to understand what lies beyond the veil. Not every listener believes in ghosts, but everyone wonders what happens when the lights go out. Real horror stories give us a glimpse. They pull back the curtain just a little, enough to make us ask, what if? What if there's more than what we see? What if those cold chills mean something? What if the silence isn't empty? Horror makes space for those questions. And strangely, it makes space for us, too. The outcasts, the curious, the ones who feel more than they say. In a strange way, fear connects us. It reminds us that, no matter who we are, we all share the same shadows. So yes, we are drawn to darkness, but not because we want to stay there. We go in to come back different, braver, wiser, more aware of what it means to be human and how fragile the boundary is between the known and the unknowable. And that's why, my friend, you pressed play today, not just to be scared, but to feel something real. We've traveled through truth and through the strange human hunger for fear. But now we enter a deeper truth, one that binds all of us across continents, cultures, and lifetimes. Horror is universal, but it's also intensely personal. Every culture has its ghosts, every family its secrets. From the howling spirits of the Himalayan valleys to the whispering shadows in abandoned Texan farmhouses, the faces may change, but the feeling is the same. Fear is the most global language ever spoken. You don't need subtitles to understand the sound of a heart skipping a beat. You don't need a translator to feel that electric tingle when someone says, "I saw something, and it wasn't human." But for all its universality, horror doesn't arrive in grand speeches. It comes quietly, through a trembling voice, a child's stare, a grandfather's unfinished sentence. It arrives through personal experience. That's where the power lives. Not in the legend itself, but in how it scars a person, in how someone still remembers 15 years later the exact sound of footsteps outside their bedroom door when no one was home. On this show, we don't just tell ghost stories, we tell someone's story. We bring you into the room with them, into the night they never forgot. You hear their breath, you feel their silence, and for a moment, their memory becomes yours. That's why our stories hit differently, because they don't belong to horror writers or screenwriters. They belong to ordinary people just like you. A woman in Delhi who swears her mirror once spoke her name. A man in Detroit who still hears his mother humming long after she was buried. These aren't characters, they're witnesses. And what they've seen has changed them. Real horror doesn't always come with blood or violence. Sometimes it's a dream you weren't supposed to remember, a knock that comes at the exact same time every night, a chill that follows you even in sunlight. That's what makes personal horror more terrifying than anything a director could invent, because it doesn't just scare you, it asks something of you. It asks you to believe, or at least to wonder. That's why this podcast isn't just about fear, it's about connection. Every episode is an invitation, not just to be frightened, but to sit beside someone, heart to heart, and say, "I believe you, you're not alone." And in that act of listening, something incredible happens. The distance between you and a stranger disappears. Your fears may not be identical, but they rhyme. Your culture may be different, but your instincts recognize theirs. That's the paradox of horror. It isolates in the moment, but unites in the aftermath. When the story ends, you're left with more than goosebumps. you're left with empathy, with shared vulnerability, with the unshakable sense that somewhere, someone else saw the same shadow. And if they made it through, maybe you can too. So far, we've talked about truth, about fear, about how horror crosses borders and bleeds into our personal lives. But now, let's talk about how it all reaches you. Through your headphones, through your car speakers, through the quiet of your bedroom, when everyone else has gone to sleep. This is more than just a podcast. This is theater of the mind. When you listen to a real horror story here, you're not watching a screen. There are no visual effects, no sudden flashes, no CG creatures jumping out to make you spill your popcorn. Instead, we give you something far more dangerous: silence. And in that silence, your imagination begins to awaken. Unlike movies, where every image is handed to you, a horror podcast invites your brain to do the heavy lifting. You start to fill in the blanks. You imagine the hallway, the shadow, the voice, and what you create in your own mind is always more terrifying than anything a camera can show you. That's the secret weapon of audio horror. It lives inside you, and the mind doesn't have a pause button. You see, sound bypasses logic. It slips under the radar of disbelief. You hear the breath of the narrator tremble, and suddenly your own breath syncs with theirs. You hear a creak in their story, and you wonder if that creak just came from your house too. The line between what's in the headphones and what's in the room with you begins to blur. That's when the experience becomes personal, and that's why people come back, not just to be told a story, but to be drawn into it. A horror podcast creates a space where time slows down, where your imagination gets louder than your phone, where the outside world fades and you're left alone with a voice and a mystery. It's intimate, it's private, and because no one else can see what you're seeing, it feels like the story was made just for you. That's why you remember it long after it ends, because you didn't just hear it, you built it inside your head. And that kind of experience doesn't fade easily. In this world of overstimulation where everything is flashy, fast, and forgettable, the horror podcast is slow, intentional, relentless. It forces you to listen, and in doing so, it makes you feel. And yes, sometimes that feeling is fear. Sometimes it's sadness. Sometimes it's the memory of something you thought you'd buried, but always it's real. That's why this format matters. Because here, in your ears, you don't need to watch horror to experience it. You become part of it. The hallway you imagine, that's your hallway. The footsteps, they're coming toward your door. And that cold breath on the back of your neck, that's not sound design. That's your mind remembering what it feels like to not be alone. So, the next time you listen, do it with the lights off. Headphones in, eyes closed. Let the story in, and see just how far your mind is willing to go before it asks you to stop. By now, you understand this is not just a podcast, not just a thrill ride, not just a place to get scared for entertainment. This is something deeper. Because real horror stories, the kind we share here, aren't just tales, they're experiences, moments someone lived through, and in some cases, moments they never fully left behind. That's why we treat every story with reverence, with care, with respect for the spirit, both literal and emotional, that lives inside it. You see, when someone tells us, "I haven't told anyone this before," they're not just sharing content, they're opening a door that cost them sleep, peace, maybe even sanity. And when they speak that memory out loud, something sacred happens. It's not performance, it's confession. Sometimes it's release. And in that moment, our job is to listen, not just as storytellers, but as witnesses. Because whether you believe in the supernatural or not, these stories carry real emotional weight. The terror in someone's voice when they describe a child that wasn't supposed to be in the photo. The way they say their grandmother visited them in a dream, and gave them a message only she could have known. That emotion is not fake. That fear is not imagined. That experience is truth to them. And so it becomes truth to us. And what about the spirits? What about the ones these stories are about? Or perhaps the ones still listening? That's the part many forget. When we speak of the dead, we must remember sometimes they hear us. So we don't mock, we don't twist their stories for cheap shocks, we don't sensationalize suffering, we honor it. Because we're not just telling ghost stories, we're carrying memories. We're holding space for grief, for trauma, for questions that were never answered. Some of these stories are decades old. Some are centuries in the making, passed down from grandmother to granddaughter, whispered around firelight, never written down until now. And when we retell them here, with your headphones pressed gently to your ears, we're not reviving old legends. We're keeping promises. Promises made to those who once said, "Please don't let this be forgotten." That's why we take our time. That's why we stay true to the tone, the timing, the energy of the person who lived it. Because sometimes the way a story is told is just as important as the story itself. In many cultures, stories are sacred. They are offerings, they are rituals, and here in our little corner of darkness, we carry that same spirit. Not because we have to, but because we owe it to those who were brave enough to speak, and to those who can no longer speak at all. So the next time you listen to one of our episodes, know this: behind every voice you hear is a life, a soul, a haunting that someone survived. And your act of listening quietly, openly, fully, is more than curiosity. It's respect, it's remembrance. And maybe, just maybe, it's what keeps the story from becoming another forgotten shadow. After everything we've talked about, after the truths revealed, after the stories shared and spirits remembered, one thing becomes undeniably clear. This show, this space, this voice in your ears, it's not just made to be heard, it's made to be felt. Because horror, real horror, doesn't live on the surface. It doesn't just whisper, boo, and walk away. No. It wraps itself around your spine. It crawls into the forgotten corners of your memory. It sits beside your deepest questions and asks, what if you're not alone? And when we bring those stories to you, when we tell you about the night someone saw their reflection blink without them, or the moment a dead relative whispered a warning that saved a life, we're not just entertaining you. We're inviting you to feel what they felt, to relive it with them. And in doing that, something powerful happens. You're not a passive listener anymore. You're part of it now. Your silence becomes part of the story. Your breath synchronizes with theirs. And your heartbeat for a moment doesn't just respond to the fear, it becomes part of the atmosphere. That's what makes this podcast different. We're not just chasing chills, we're chasing connection. Every gasp, every pause, every whisper you hear is designed not just to reach your ears, but to stir something inside you. Because this isn't about being scared for the sake of it. It's about remembering what it feels like to be fully awake. You've felt it before, haven't you? That moment late at night, when you're the only one still awake, and suddenly the air shifts. The house creaks differently. The silence feels too silent. You don't know why, but your instincts do. That's the space we enter with this show. The space where the rational ends and the real begins. And when you feel that when something in your chest tightens, or your eyes start scanning the shadows, you realize something. You're not just listening to a horror story. You're remembering something you already knew. That this world is deeper than it looks. That there are forces, energies, moments we can't always explain, but we can feel. That's the gift of this experience. It gives you permission to feel, to fear, to wonder, to believe even just for a moment that there's more to this life than logic allows. And maybe, after the episode ends, you'll sit in the dark just a little longer. Not out of fear, but because In that silence, you felt something. And in this noisy, numbing world, that feeling is rare. So no, this show isn't just background noise. It's not just a genre. It's not just another story. It's an invitation to feel what someone else felt, to hear what others ignored, to believe what others laughed at, and to know that maybe in some shadowed corner of your life, you've already lived a horror story of your own. Welcome to the place where we feel it all together.